One more time, just in case.
Okay.
This is the Two Tall Jews Show.
And we are the Two Tall Jews, and we are ready to go.
On today's show, we are going to have a quick discussion about our respective favorite Instagram posts of the week for our main account on this day in Jewish history. We are going to have a quick recap of Tisha B'Av, how the fast was for me, how the fast wasn't for Isaac. Quick discussion about the two-state solution or the one-state solution.
Or the new state solution.
And finally, we're bringing back a fan favorite, Bubby's Delight. Moving on to the On This Day in Jewish History rundown. We are going to discuss our favorite posts. Isaac, you want to get us started?
Yeah. Before we jump into each of our respective favorite posts from the past week, I just want to make a quick mention. In a prior podcast, we were talking about the current state of anti-Semitism, specifically in Hollywood. We mentioned Bari Weiss. And it's also cool when people learn. And we here at OTDH, you know, it's fun, but it's also learning's a big component. And it sounds like Nick Cannon has learned something since we spoke last. He recently purchased Bari Weiss's book, How to Fight Anti-Semitism. He posted about it. A lot of Jews have seen this and retweeted it. And all I can say is, because I don't know Nick Cannon personally, I hope this is all true. I hope he reads the book from start to finish. And I hope this is a turning point for him. And I hope that going forward, he's able to use his wide platform for good.
Agreed, yes. I noticed that, and it's funny, the If Not Now Twitter account responded to Nick Cannon saying, "Oh, no, don't learn how to fight anti-Semitism through Barry. Look at our website. We know how to fight anti-Semitism." Wait, sorry, before we continue, for those listening for the first time, this show is an extension of an Instagram account, an Instagram blog that we both run called On This Day in Jewish History, where on a daily basis we talk about a certain event, major or minor, in Jewish history. So on the show that we release weekly, Isaac and I like to talk about each of our respective favorite posts, because we do have either 6 or 7 posts, depending on whether or not we post on Saturday night. And so what we're going to do now is that we're going to discuss our favorite posts. Go ahead, Isaac.
So my favorite post was from July 31st, which marked the birthday of Primo Levi. And for those who don't know, Primo Levi was a preeminent writer, public intellectual, and scholar, and Holocaust survivor. His most famous book, Survival in Auschwitz, which I had the privilege of reading when I was in college, is probably one of the top 3 preeminent books by Holocaust survivors or people that fell victim to the Shoah. And while Levi had a sort of unfortunate and tragic demise, he is widely believed to have taken his own life in the late 80s. His style of writing and just his, I don't know what the word for, maybe sort of candor with regard to talking about his personal experience surviving Auschwitz, I found to be incredibly humbling. And I'm sure it had a powerful effect on you as well.
Yeah, well, actually, I've never read it, but I've had this book for a couple of years, and definitely after we posted about it, I was a little inspired to start it, and over Shabbat, I did start it. I'm a couple pages in. Right after the part, this is, again, Primo Levi, Survival in Auschwitz. On Friday was his birthday in 1919.
Yeah, I believe so.
So yeah, I mean, it's always interesting to read, individual accounts from the Holocaust, because it's so easy to get caught up in such big numbers, 6 million or 1 million from Poland, or 500,000 from certain countries. So like, it's also good to look at the individual, and that's why also I like some of the posts. We had one post last week about, now that we're on the topic of the Holocaust, it's not my favorite post of the week, but we had a post about a specific Lithuanian village being liquidated, where all 500 men were murdered, as part of the Einsatzgruppe in earlier part of the war, where the gas chambers weren't in effect yet, and it was more of like, actual murder with guns and murder pits. So again, it was 500 instead of such a big number. 500, I can imagine 500 people. I can't imagine 6 million people. And so as a way to remember the Holocaust, it's always good to bring the number into a more personable and manageable quantity.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's also a great way for Jews and non-Jews alike to discuss history. And I think, for one of the numerous reasons, and you can say this about Survival in Auschwitz, you can say this about Night, The Diary of Anne Frank, and, Man's Search for Meaning. All of these texts are texts that, at least with my experience, have been read by both Jews, my Jewish friends and non-Jewish friends.
I wanted to highlight our post on July 29th, where we marked the first ship of Russian Jewry that arrived at Ellis Island, of Jews, Russian Jews, or Eastern European Jews, probably wasn't specifically just Russian, that came to America, escaping the pogroms, escaping Tsarist Russia, escaping the Cossacks and the blood libels, and hundreds of years of the ability to live as Jews, because obviously they were, they lived in an era called the Pale of the Settlement, but they were always at a certain risk. It was never, things were never fully secure, and as is the case throughout European Jewish history. So, this marked, up until now, there were Jews in America. Jews first arrived in the 1700s, right, to Rhode Island and Charleston. So it wasn't the first group of Jews to arrive, but it was the first wave of Jews to arrive. And between 1881 and 1914, I think that was the biggest
concentration of immigration.
Right. And a lot of them stayed in New York after moving, and after, because that's where all the immigrants came. And what I wanted to highlight is, it's very easy to nowadays be like, oh, like Jews have it so great in America, and they don't have any issues. We've seen in the last month that we do have issues still on a more cultural level. The idea that Jews were basically given, this stature in society where we have access to good jobs, and we have access to good money, and we have access to opportunity. It wasn't like this in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Jews had to really struggle, and they had to work really bad jobs as peddlers. They had to live in tenements, 15 to a room, or they had to learn English. They all spoke Yiddish. They had a really hard time with the language. They had to become accustomed to the customs. They had to deal with the religious discrimination. The country, this country is probably the freest country for religions, but at the same time, there is still religious discrimination, as not as much as persecution. There is the religious discrimination, and a lot of them had to create their own path, create really the American dream, where it's like, I'm not going to be given anything. In fact, it's going to be harder for me because of the language barrier, because of the professional barrier. These people were coming from villages, and coming to an industrial country that's way ahead of Russia, probably, definitely at that stage, right? The late Industrial Revolution. It was a moment of like, I either learn or I get left behind. And for a lot of Jews, they were coming from a very traditional religious background. They had to almost also leave their religious background. A lot of them shaved, a lot of them changed their last names, either by choice or because they literally, at Ellis Island, they couldn't pronounce it properly. So the person that was writing it down just wrote down whatever they heard. So that happened a lot, right?
Yeah, my last name, Simon, was changed at Ellis Island. The official, the name on the ship's manifest is, there are several. There's Heimovich, there's Simovich, there's Simonovich.
Right.
And my name was Americanized, as was so many others. Bill Maher makes a point to a different context, but he says something that I think applies to what you're speaking to. This idea of, in the United States, and this was I'm saying this was true both then and now. We have freedom of religion, but we don't have equality of religion. And I thought that was an interesting way of putting it. And I think that there's a relationship, or you could draw a relationship between that lack of equality amongst religions and the degree to which people who were of certain religions had to assimilate or had to Americanize in order to be free, or as free as religions that were just more socially acceptable.
Right. Definitely. So yeah, and as a last point, we always talk about Israel as the startup nation, the true underdog, right? Everyone's like, how did Israel get to where it's at in just 70 years, 72 years? And to an extent, the story of the American Eastern European Jews that are now American Jews, the descendants of, that's also an underdog story. That's also a story that of trial and error, trial and success that we rarely speak about because of how successful we've been here, and how we broke that glass ceiling of like, of learning the language, of assimilating, but also maintaining our traditions. And right, so even the most assimilated groups still, maintain certain aspects of their Jewish identity, not to forget it completely. And then, of course, some Jewish groups from that time completely assimilated, as we saw the Jews that moved to Hollywood and created, the movie industry there, because they were banned from doing it in Chicago and in New York. So they went ahead and they started, and these were the children of these immigrants who were like, okay, I want to create a new, again, like we've spoken about this, but like a new Jew. Or I spoke about this in the podcast with my friend, where it's like Israel was the new Jew, and now the American Jew is also a new Jew, of finding the balance between assimilation and not. We're going to move on to a little bit of a recap from this past week, where we celebrated Tisha B'Av, the saddest day in Jewish history. And Isaac, you had some questions?
Yeah. Well, first off, that Tisha B'Av, I was confused about the pronunciation. That's not to be confused with Tisha B'Av, the place where NYU students study in the Tisch School of the Arts.
No, yeah, it's
okay.
Tisha in Hebrew is 9th, B'Av of Av, so the 9th of the month of Av.
Okay, great. Yeah, so as someone that, I don't like to say the word more secular, because I just don't like that. I think that sort of assumes that only certain religious Jews have a monopoly on the religion. But as a less religious Jew, less observant Jew who does not practice and does not fast on Tish B'Av, learning about the day, and learning that it's a day of commemorating 3 separate events, tragedies that the Jews, that occurred to the Jews. Is this, would you say, the only sort of major religion in the Jewish tradition that was created as a byproduct of Jewish tragedy?
Well, before I answer the question, I did want to highlight also, we had a special audio-only episode where we went deep into the more observant reasons behind Tisha B'Av and the historical lens. So if you missed it, go ahead, check it out on Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to podcasts, Google, and you can listen to that conversation between myself and Rabbi Yaakov Mizrahi. So more to your question, it's definitely the only Jewish holiday that centers around something that's specifically tragic, where there is halacha, Jewish law that upholds a tragic day. Yeah. But our tradition also says that it's going to also be the happiest day when the Mashiach, when the Messiah arrives, because it's going to be the day that reminds us that we are no longer in exile, and that it's going to be, and it's going to flip. It's going to be the happiest day on the calendar. So, and also it's not just the two temples being destroyed, but it's also, or you said 3. What was the third event that you? Because there's a couple. There's, according to Jewish tradition, the sin of the spies in the Old Testament and the Torah happened on Tisha B'Av. And then also, obviously, the two temples, the Spanish Inquisition started on Tisha B'Av. The Jews were expelled from England on Tisha B'Av. The Bar Kokhba rebellion was squashed on Tisha B'Av. So at a certain point, it's no longer a coincidence that there's something about this day that, elicits tragedy. And so for that reason, a lot of observant Jews try to avoid doing anything dangerous on this day, try to take it easy. The 3 weeks prior, also, you try to avoid putting yourself in a dangerous position. But yeah, I think I don't know if this discussion does justice. So for that reason, we wanted to create a separate episode to go deeper into it. So again, if you missed it, it was on Thursday. We released it, Tisha B'Av exclusive with Rabbi Yaakov Mizrahi.
Typically, op-ed pieces in the Times regarding Israel, it's not that they're misinformed. It's just that it oftentimes perpetuates a saturated opinion, or it presents an opinion in an articulate way, but it's not something new. And this op-ed might fall into that category, but I like the way Cohen sort of set it up. So what Cohen essentially does in the piece, and it came out a couple of days ago, it's still his most recent column. It can be found online. So what he essentially does is he sets up this test. And this test sort of involves the following. It involves outlining the factors that make both a 1 and a 2-state solution impossible, and then determining which solution is less impossible, and essentially saying that one is the most plausible. So in the beginning of the piece, he references Peter Beinart's sort of publicly switched opinion, going from he used to be a proponent of the 1-state solution, and now a 2-state solution, and now he supports a 1-state solution in which Palestinians and Israelis live and coexist peacefully, not side by side in different states, but cohabitate in the same country, in the same land, under the same government. And Cohen disagrees with that. He outlines all the reasons why he disagrees with that, and he essentially says that the reason why the 2-state solution has failed isn't because Palestinians and Jews can never get along, but it's because the leadership of both the Palestinian Authority, Netanyahu in Israel, and of course with Trump being president, the leadership, and mainly sort of Netanyahu and Trump, are very in support of maintaining the status quo. So he quotes the head of J Street, who says that the 2-state solution isn't dead, it's in a coma, and there's a difference. And again, do I disagree with that? I don't know, but I thought it was an interesting phrasing, and I think that, I don't know, it never occurred to me, maybe it was naive on my end, I'll let you jump in a moment, but it never occurred to me that the perpetual failure of a 2-state solution could be coughed up to current leadership. I thought, because the 2-state solution, has been talked about for decades, right? So it precedes Netanyahu, but Cohen was sort of making a point that the current state of affairs will just allow the status quo to prevail.
Yeah, I think that's my problem with some of these op-eds, where it's like they think that they're coming in with these breakthrough information, and they're really just saying the same thing, or saying a disingenuous point like, oh, it's all the fault of the current administrations, because it's Israel, Palestine, and America. And also, to an extent, it's like, I believe that America shouldn't be the only country involved in this. Right? We can bring in other countries, especially on the Palestinian side, that are going to be more vocal for their opinion. Maybe countries like Egypt, Jordan, countries that have a peace deal with Israel. I've always believed, I really thought that when the Kushner-Trump plan was people were beginning to talk about it, I really had high hopes for it because I thought that it would involve other countries in that way. It would involve Saudi Arabia, it would involve the Emirates, it would involve Qatar, it would involve Egypt and Jordan. These countries that in the past were on the side of, okay, let's use the Palestinian identity and the Palestinian narrative to attack Israel. And now that all these countries are more friendly with Israel, maybe not openly, but they all are, maybe now it's actually economically and national security wise, it benefits them to reach a solution here, coming from the Palestinian side, but having Israel in mind because they have skin in the game.
Not to mention, the United States has not brokered every peace deal that is currently in place with Israel. The peace deal between Israel and Jordan, I don't believe, was brokered by the United States.
In 1994? I think it was.
I
think that's it. It's because the U.S.
That's the problem.
Was instrumental in Egypt with Carter, and then also Jordan, and so because the U.S. was the only country that was able to do that, or the only country that cared to do that, then now to an extent we all think, it's the only country that can. But now we live in a world where the Palestinians don't trust the American opinion, right? We're too biased. The U.S. is too biased towards Israel. Fair, it is. And for good reason. And then, so that's why I'm saying, like, bring in Russia, bring in Turkey. Like, if these countries really cared, and it would be a test, like, if these countries really cared about finding a solution, then, and if it's such a, and then then we would do it. At the same time, to an extent, there shouldn't be any country being involved. It should just be the Israel and the Palestinians. The U.S. shouldn't get involved. This is a problem of the Israelis and the Palestinians, and it should stay the problem between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The only reason that hasn't been solved is because we've involved so many outside powers that have different interests. It's always been that way. And all these different interests have forgotten that it's about two specific interests. And until those two interests sit alone, we're never gonna. But even I'm not so confident in that either.
Well, what do you think? I mean, earlier you brought up you mentioned that you were hopeful of the Kushner peace plan, and what are your thoughts now?
I don't think it did what I said it did.
Right.
It was the same old. But to an extent, it gave a lot to the Palestinians, but it doesn't create borders. And that's the problem, because that region, if anybody knows the way that region actually looks and not the way that it looks on all these maps that were given, it's really complex. The entire West Bank is on a mountain. And half of the Palestinian population lives in Gaza under a terrorist organization that we're supposed to deal with and then it's supposed to recognize eventually. Like, these are all facts that it's so easy to forget and be like, oh, Israel's blockading Gaza because it's run by a terrorist organization that wants to destroy Israel. If that wasn't the case, there would be no blockade. And that blockade is also upheld by Egypt.
Right.
So that's another thing that bothers me about these op-eds is, like, it pretends like it's black and white sometimes. And I'm not saying the op-ed was anti-Israel. Actually, it was pretty objective. It hit both sides pretty well. So, like, it's just like there's just so much to resolve before we talk about borders. How can we talk about borders when the government of the Palestinians is either a mafia, or they're both mafias, but one of them is a corrupt mafia in the West Bank that's supposed to be the moderate one, and the other one is a terrorist organization. Palestinians themselves know how corrupt their leadership is. And this leadership was supposed to be temporary. And they haven't changed.
Yeah, they haven't held elections.
So that's what I lose hope when I see that, because everyone seems to want peace except for the people that are living there. And I include the Israelis in that. because to them, peace is the status quo. Because that's just the way it's been, and it's always worked. But to what extent? Until how long are they going to do this?
I mean, so the moral of the story is stay tuned for our next episode when the two tall Jews solve the Middle East peace plan.
Yeah, we should propose our own. I've seen the Confederation of Israel and Palestine. I don't know if you've seen that.
No.
I think he like kind of mentioned it. It's like the United States of Israel and Palestine. But then he's like, okay, but then look at Iraq and Syria and Lebanon. What happened when we did a united state of like different ethnics? Yeah, it's too hard now. We're too deep in the sauce. There's too many Jews living in the West Bank that would never recognize Israel. That would never recognize a Palestinian state. And I don't know. We're gonna have to pick this up. Keep the conversation going.
Absolutely.
It's done here. Now on to Bubbe's Delight, where it's a fan favorite that we haven't done since the second episode. People are like, "Where's Bubbe's Delight?" And by people, I mean nobody. And so I have to go get mine. So give me a sec. And we're back. So I'll go first. My Bubbe's Delight, straight out of the oven from Bubbe herself. It's these chocolate sandwiches from Kosher Market. Delicious. Look at this. It's a Shabbos classic. Every Parv house knows what these are.
Oh, and Mayor, just for the goyim out there, what does Parv mean?
Means you probably have so many goyim listening. This Parv is basically, it's neither milk nor dairy. It's like a weird purgatory food that can be had after you eat meat, because some of us crazy Jews wait 6 hours or 3 to 6 hours after eating meat, and now this is getting too long, and this is why everyone hates the Jews. So
got it. And now that you've said what Parv is, what does goyim mean?
The nations. So
got it.
For the psychos that have turned it into a slur, it's not a slur. The guys that wrote the Torah, Hashem, Moshe, whatever, they they got lazy by calling other countries by just literally other countries. So so good. There's chocolate down the middle.
Wow. So to just wrap up this segment, instead of showing you something I do have, I'm going to show you something I don't have. And what I don't have is Russ and Daughter's licorice. So it's an incremental thing. You know, I got to show my favorite Bubbe's Delight thing so far. And now, you know, it's sort of it's a weaning off phase. So this episode, I don't have it. And next episode, I'll have something new. So this is me not eating the Russ and Daughter's licorice.